Hello, lovely dance people, and welcome to David's Dance Podcast. I'm your host, David Evans. We have an amazing choreographer with us today who's been making work since 2015. Her work deals with issues such as the environment, social and political issues, and she manages to somehow tackle really difficult subject matter with originality, playfulness, and a lightness of touch. We're so pleased to welcome to the podcast Greta Gauhe. Greta, welcome.
Thank you very much. Such a nice introduction.
No worries. Thanks so much for joining us today. Let's start at the beginning and tell us, how did you get into dance?
So I think I had quite a linear dance, not career, but the dance life, I would say. So I started very early when I was 4 years old. I started with ballet. And then after a while, I dropped out of ballet because I didn't like it anymore for some reason, and I wanted to do hip hop. So when I was about like 12 or 13, I started dancing hip hop really intensively, and went to competitions in Munich and Germany, and I loved it. And at one point, while I was dancing in this hip hop studio, a teacher came and she was teaching us contemporary, and it was the first time I heard about contemporary. I did contemporary, and afterwards I was completely sold out. I was like, okay, this is what I want. And then she informed me about a school in Munich called Evenson International, and they have a pre-education for young children and for youngsters. And I joined them, and there I trained.
Is that like sort of like pre kind of like higher education training, sort of like leading up to more difficult, maybe degree level training? Is that what that is?
Yeah, I think so. You could call it like that. It was really intense. I was, they have like evening courses for people who want to teach dance, actually. So for older people, 18 plus, and I joined all their classes there as well. So I had like intensive training up to 4 or 5 hours every day through that time. And totally in love. And and then when I was 18, I applied for lots of different dance schools all around Europe and got into Trinity Laban, and then did my BA at Laban. And afterwards, in 2015, I kind of started to do my own things, and I founded the Follow Through Collective. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you were born and grew up in Germany, and then you came to the UK to pursue a dance degree and a dance career, and you're based here now. What sort of differences have you noticed between sort of the German dance scene or German approach and what you've seen on the UK side, and maybe which do you prefer or have a leaning towards?
I think it's quite difficult for me to say, because I only have the experience at Evenson, and I never returned to Germany properly to really set up my own company here or to work here. So I can only talk from that experience. I mean, I'm very experienced with the UK dance, but I think there's little difference actually in the educational system, other than in Germany, they don't really teach all techniques like Graham or Cunningham anymore. So it's a more, I think they just get in a lot of guest teachers who are coming and teaching their own styles. It's a mix of all these styles together. Whereas in the UK, I found in my BA at least, we had hardly any guest teachers, and we had always the same teachers who are teaching regularly in the institution, and it was very focused on the technique. Whether that's better or not, I can't really judge, I guess. But
yeah, so I guess it's a little bit more of kind of like just absorbing the kind of whatever the modern choreographers are and the like. It does sort of make sense to me to some degree, in the sense that when you leave higher education dance, in terms of your own dance journey, that is pretty much what you end up doing, because a lot of your learning does come from the choreographers that you work with, and going and doing master classes or intensives with choreographers. And that's really because you want to like work in their companies, and because for a lot of these choreographers, so much of what they're trying to do is to develop an original movement language and a kind of original dance style and way of doing things. And because of that, it's stuff that you won't learn in training most of the time. And I did feel that maybe a little bit in the UK, where we were, yeah, like you say, sort of, okay, let's learn this. And then you get out and you're like, okay, actually, sort of, this is really helpful to know. Or, you find that certain movements are maybe way more important, and you can start to specialize a little bit. Um,
Yeah, I guess it's also, but thinking about it, I think it's after the education, you can also kind of choose what you want or in what direction you want to go as an artist.
mhm.
And then seeing the BA more as a really like a foundation that gives you a good foundation. And from there, you can go and choose your direction. But I think, yeah, both ways are great. And I think having guest artists and coming to institution is definitely one way forward. It would be great to have that more, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree. And so, from being at Laban, so you've had a bit of a crazy journey. Then you went to the Place and did a master's in performance, and that's where you and I, for the most part, connected when you were creating work at that time. And then you went on to do an MFA at Laban. In what ways do you find during that period? Because that's probably when you really started to find yourself a bit more as a choreographer. How was being in those places? How did that help shape your choreography and kind of shape your direction?
Mm. So I think at the place, really, beforehand, I was more creating works for the theater. So for black box traditional theater space.
Hmm.
I was always focusing on collaboration, so working with musicians, composers, visual artists, and that just stemmed from my interest in and sharing knowledge with other artists, and in order to improve what we want to say or improve the quality of the show. But I guess starting at the place, I met various amazing dance artists and choreographers, for example, Florence Peake and Eve Stainton. And I also performed in their work at the end of the MA. And I noticed that me as a performer, first of all, I was much more interested in having a direct interaction with audience members and to really leave an impact on people, I guess, with what I'm doing on stage, and to sometimes when there's this black auditorium, you can't even see any faces, and you feel very distanced from audience members, whereas actually you're trying to deliver something to them and for them.
Mm.
And this really made me question my own practice, and I wanted to focus much more on audience participation and also bringing the works into other spaces than a traditional theater space. So looking much more at gallery spaces as well, or outdoor spaces, because also those spaces obviously attract a different audience. So audiences then would normally maybe not go to a theater, might come to a park performance or might come to a gallery performance. And it had a lot to do with questioning, for whom do I make my art? Why do I make art? And who do I want to reach with it?
Right. And so there's maybe a little bit of kind of also an accessibility thing there. I think I kind of agree. It's really great when work does get out of the theater. I think contemporary dance can suffer from a bit of elitism, and we are seeing a shift away from London. We've seen that with the Arts Council pouring more funding into regional areas, which is fantastic, because it can't just be this like London-centric middle upper class thing. Otherwise, it's like, who are we really making work for? And it's really beautiful, actually. I've done a few outdoor performances myself, and you do get a broader variety of reactions, because people don't necessarily have a context for what they're viewing. But then sometimes also people come up to you and you're like, thank you so much, that like really affected me. And people who have had no exposure to dance have really sometimes profound reactions to the work. Yeah, I think you bring up something really interesting as well that I hadn't really thought of, and that's the way in which interaction with the audience and audience participation is also about the performer. It's not just for the audience, but me as a performer seeing my audience has a very kind of deep way and change in the way that, you know, you dance and you move and you kind of relate to them, as opposed to just kind of looking out into the darkness as you do when you're on a stage and the lights are in your eyes. um Tell me a little bit more about kind of the role of audience participation in your work, because it's started there and it's a thread that we've seen continue throughout, and I think you do it in a really interesting way, in that in a lot of contemporary dance and just a lot of dance theater that I've seen sometimes, and performance art, sometimes audience participation is just like this baton that we just hit the audience with. And I feel like performance artists in particular can be you know, quite frightening. Yeah, and it's all about challenging the audience, or, you know, being in their face, or this kind of like shock value, or shocking them into engagement, you know. And I've gone along to like pieces with non-dancers, and they see, you know, this piece contains audience participation, and then just hearing them groan like, oh no, are they gonna like get in our face? What are they gonna do? But I think you managed to do it in your work in a way that people come away feeling engaged and collaborated with. Tell it, is that intentional? Is that just a sort of outcome of your process? Tell us about that.
And no, it's definitely intentional. So I've been researching quite a lot into audience participation actually before even starting with it. And I, similar to you, I had experience as being an audience member myself and going to a performance, often by really big choreographers as well, and had people jumping on me or touching me without my consent, and it made me feel really vulnerable as an audience member, and that really made me question, okay, what should audience participation be for? And I believe it really should be there to enhance the experience of the audience. And in my work, so I started really with One Click Away, which is a work about the overproduction of waste. And this started by accumulating 200 cardboard boxes in the studio space. And it was a very simple task that we're doing. We're shifting those cardboard boxes around. We're building towers. We're balancing them on different body parts. And the audience is placed around us. So we're sharing the same space. And here and there, we're asking them to participate, and we're asking them if they would like to join us. So we're asking them, they don't have to. That's, I think, a really important point, to ask for their consent. And most of them are really happy to join in, because the way we set up the work is very positive, and dancers are greeting people once they're entering the space already. So we're creating this kind of non-hierarchical relationship between audience and performer already when people are entering the space. And also by having them really close proximity to us, we're kind of the otherwise existing hierarchy maybe on a stage, on a normal stage with the auditorium, can be quite extreme. And also then in the work, I guess my performers, they're not really engaging in extreme or in very technical things. So sometimes this can also create feelings of, oh, I cannot do this in audience members. Oh, they're much better than I am. So that would hold them back from participating. But the things that we're asking them to do are very simple and easy. So we're asking them to maybe balance a cardboard box on one of their body parts, or we're asking them to build a massive tower in the middle of the stage, and everyone can contribute to it. And we had people literally climbing on top of each other, on each other's shoulders, to build it even higher and to make it higher. Wow. And people were super engaged with it. And I think this really comes from asking for if they want to be part of it, and also allowing them to not be part of it, because I'm sure a lot of audience members also just want to sit down and just enjoy the performance.
And kind of either way, people like really appreciate just being checked in on, and just being asked the question also makes you feel kind of connected with. And I think it's you bring up this issue, which I think is really interesting and important, of trust between the audience and the performers, and part of that is also tied in with expectations. And I think part of the key that you really point out is you've got to build a rapport with the audience. You know, and it can be just as simple as starting with how we would build a rapport with the audience, with anyone, and just saying, hi, how are you? You know, we don't need to overcomplicate things as artists. You know, we're just human beings. And sometimes just coming into this space, being conversational really works. You know, it's a style that like Siobhan Davies and a lot of her kind of associated artists as well, Charlie Morrissey, that I love. They also have this really kind of conversational style that really puts you kind of at ease watching the work. And I found even watching work that is quite intellectual, it's not intimidating because they're just like, hi, how are you? And they really invite you into the work in that way. Yeah, I think it's just that kind of
relationship building, really,
that kind of relationship building.
Yeah, making a connection to another human being, and you're also just a human being, and there's nothing between that actually in that work, and building an empathy for each other, I guess, or having empathy for each other already when they're entering. Yeah.
Wow. And does talking about empathy, does that feel like an important kind of mode to kind of connect with the issues? Because I think there's this interesting thing of, you know, you've dealt with kind of social issues like sort of discrimination, and also this idea of kind of unity and togetherness while being the individual, which was there in common ground, but is also kind of present in your work now, here or nowhere. It's these kind of themes. How, I don't know where I'm going with this. How do you feel that like empathy and the core and choreography, this medium that you've chosen, is a good way to deal with and unpack these issues? Say, you know, doing a photograph. What is unique about choreography that you feel allows you to tackle these issues as an artist?
So I think, yeah, definitely empathy or connection and togetherness, I guess, could say, have played a really important role in my last few works, really, and always looking at different issues in our society. But once I create the work, it always ends up about, at least for my dances, about togetherness and building something together and fighting for something together. And I think what choreography or dance choreography, the really, really strong power that it has is that it's actually human beings performing and being there and working on something together. And I think just that in itself is so powerful. A group of people coming together and unfolding a topic and meeting in the studio and being really physical with each other, touching each other, working towards an aim. That in itself is already, I think, really strong and relevant. And
you become like a little family or a little tribe. Like, you know, when you're working intensely on a project as dancers with choreographer, there is something quite like, quite tribal, not in a like sort of a bad sense, but in quite like a primal sense. And you're also very hands-on with the people that you're with. And so it can be quite an intimate and intense kind of setting. And you're working on a project together. So it's a very bonding experience. And it is sort of like a little sort of, you know, under the microscope view of society in a way. And I think that's very much kind of, present in your work, this kind of, how are people together? And how do those kind of relationships like kind of unpack and kind of work out?
And creating a space as well. Now with my recent two works, is really creating a space that enables also audience members or participants to enter the same world that we've created in the studio space previously as well. So I'm really trying to have this open space where everyone feels included into, and tackling a topic or talking about a topic, but everyone's opinions are matter and are valued. And it's really about creating a little community within the framework of one choreography, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I think that's such a crucial time to be able to make work that is focused on conversation making, because so much of our experience of discussing difficult issues isn't open, isn't inviting. It's just Facebook, us yelling at each other, or our social media algorithms making it so that we're only talking to the people that we agree with, and usually in a way in which we would never do online. People are so much more aggressive online than they would be when they see a human face behind that. And when you talk to someone in person, just your instincts kick in, and people just tend to behave themselves a little bit more and just be a bit more respectful of kind of how we unpack difficult issues, really. Because
it's really the lack of human contact. Also with the pandemic, that was quite present, I think, for everyone, this social isolation. And especially, I think, also us as dancers, we felt it quite a lot, because we're so used to be with buddies and to touch and to share a space. And as you said, to have these little communities here and there that we're creating, and little families, and all of that all of a sudden was not possible anymore. And I think it affected me a lot. And that's also how I kind of came to my recent work, to Memories of Skin, because the lack of touch really impacted me personally, but I also realized that a lot of other people were really impacted by that.
For Memories of Skin, so that premiered about a couple of weeks ago in October at the Laban Theatre. I was able to watch on the live stream, which was fantastic. I think is a great thing in general. I think that we're seeing the digitalization of a lot of dance. Just I think it doesn't remove the barrier or the need to experience things live.
No.
But I think in terms of just the accessibility of dance, it's maybe a good kind of spoke in the wheel.
It moves beyond borders. That's what we realized. We had my family from Germany could tune in, or from one of our dancers, she's from Denmark. Her family was also able to watch. So that's quite nice. It has a nice effect. But for me, for this work, it was also really important to have a live element of it as well. It wouldn't have worked just through, via a live stream.
Yeah, I agree, because for those who are listening, when you're watching the piece, we on the live stream see the audience sat around in a circle. So to sort of establish the scene a little bit, the piece is 4 dancers sort of backlit by this projection of moving skin kind of collage that's carrying on throughout. And there's a live musician creating sort of a soundscape in the corner, and these 4 dancers are on a stage, but the audience is in a circle around them, and they're sort of dealing with ideas of touch and kind of unpacking them choreographically throughout the work. And we see them applying touch to themselves, tapping on the skin and talking about it as if it were happening to the audience, and then telling the audience to sort of lift my arm, and it sort of becomes sort of like puppetry between the audience and the performers. And at one point there was this sort of lovely duet that happened, which was as if touch but apart, but had a real weight and physicality to it. The fear when you do a duet like that is that it looks sort of tacky or like sort of miming.
Definitely takes time.
Yeah, when I watched it, I was like, wow, I'm really impressed that they pulled this off, because it had such a weight and a physicality to it, as if the dancers were in contact,
That
did
really became our
yeah.
practice, I guess. Yeah, the practice stemmed from us being isolated at home in various countries, and we met via Zoom, and we tried to rehearse via Zoom, and it just didn't work.
Oh my
It really
gosh.
didn't. And we were like, okay, let's not do that. But we found a way to still feel connected and to work with the topic about touch by I asked them to record themselves imagining where and how they are touching each other's bodies. And so they're sitting at home. Some prefer to do it in a bathtub. Some prefer to do it underneath a blanket or in a really comfortable position. And for 20 minutes, they're accessing the imagination and talking about how gently or where and how, what sensations the other person would get from that touch that they're offering. And became this whole exploration from home in regards to touch. And I think it was really powerful. Like my performers, they were really, it was really touching to receive all these voice recordings from another person and to listen to them, and also kind of like a meditation. And it really reminded us of the value of touch, especially during a time where the absence was so present. And this then later on, once we were able to be back in the studio together, but still we had to keep obviously 2 meters apart and we had to socially distance, this became the starting point of this practice. So I was questioning, how can we remember touch or imagine touch? How can we remember that truthfully? And I think it became possible through also theoretical research about mental imagery, sensory imagery, and placebo studies as well, which kind of proved that our mind can be so strong imagining something that it can even heal a whole body. But at the same time, also, obviously, we could really imagine the sensation of the touch of another person.
Yeah, that point in the piece where they're like, and now I'm placing the hands on the head or I'm tapping the neck. And it was amazing me watching it, and just, you do sort of experience those kind of sensations, it's like, anytime someone mentions like your posture and then suddenly you're like sort of adjusting and sitting up, or it's doing those sorts of things, how it's just using attention, really, like drawing attention to parts of the body, which is amazing, because then for the audience, they're also having a body experience. They're not just watching passively these dancers do these amazing things while their body is disengaged from what is happening. They're also becoming sort of like a part of the piece in a way, because they are drawing attention to like, oh, how is my body feeling? How is that like sitting with me?
Yeah. We also found in rehearsals very strongly that it had a lot to do with kinesthetic empathy, and that it would only work when the dancers would do it to themselves. So if I would just say, I'm biting the hairs on your forearm, it has less effect. It's less effectful than when actually doing it and showing it to you. Because we as human beings, we can relate to actions in front of us much easier, and when we see them as well, instead of only hearing them, I guess. That was the main thing.
And it's a part of kind of empathy in a well, so as well, like part of my understanding is that, when you're watching someone else, your brain is mapping it as if you were doing it. And that's a big part of why watching footage or watching someone and being around great dancers and seeing them do it teaches you and helps you learn, because just by watching it, you don't even have to physically do it. Your brain is looking at that and trying to map it onto your body. And it's also an important part of our empathy experience, because it's what allows us, that sort of cognitive ability is what allows us, when we watch a film, to literally put ourselves in the shoes of the protagonist, because we can sort of map ourselves onto their body and go, what would it be like if I was physically there? What would it be like if I felt that, or that happened to me? So I think it's this wonderful tie in the work between kind of this kind of sort of physical kind of approach to empathy, and using that to actually really connect with people.
Yeah, and I think the closer you are also in a space, the closer you are to the dancers, and the closer you are to other audience members, so you can watch other audience members react, and you can see their reaction, you can see how they're moving with the dancers, and all of that really impacts the experience as well. So for me, definitely it wouldn't have worked. The same piece for a traditional theater setup, it wouldn't work. Obviously you could probably try and do it, but it wouldn't have the same effect for the people who are in the space with us. At various points, for example, it blurs who's the performer and who's the audience members. There's one point where we are lifting them up into the space, and some of them literally they gave all their body weight and everyone looked at them, so they kind of became a performer and really part of the work, and we needed them to be active in the work as well. The work wouldn't exist without them. So it was really the line between audience member and performer wasn't there anymore. I think we're really trying to create this inclusive space where everyone feels part of it and an active part of the work.
And in many ways, that's part of what's so interesting from a form point of view about your work, is that your work the piece isn't choreography. Often if a piece becomes sort of repertoire or becomes archived, someone comes in and, they used to annotate every single movement by hand, and now we just film it. But even when we'd film it, we'd say, okay, now this is this step and this is that step, and we're going to set that in stone tablets, and that is the piece. Whereas it seems to me that for you, the work is the space, is the social context that you create, and the movement isn't the piece. No. And you've managed to create choreography in which the movement is actually facilitates the piece, and the movement is facilitating the kind of connection and the context that you're creating, which is also must be exciting for you as performers, because if you're doing a long tour and you're doing the same exact movements every night, it is easy to become sort of disengaged as a performer. And it's a great way to sort of keep your dancers engaged every single night, because you're going to have different people every night and kind of different reactions. I thought your dancers had a sort of really lovely kind of presence, and they really helped facilitate that trust and that connection, and that felt quite genuine with the audience. Was that something that you worked on in rehearsals through I don't know, some kind of tasks or something? How do you build up something like that? Because it doesn't just sort of drop out of the air, creating that kind of lovely vibe. How did you create that?
Yeah, it does take work, or at least a lot of thought process, definitely. So the first thing, I guess, that's really important for us is that I never work with characters on stage, or so the performer, they always perform themselves. They're never performing a story of someone else, or they never try to embody someone else's emotions or someone else's struggles or positive experiences. So it's really them who they are representing on stage as well. And we're working a lot with how can we relate to other people. It seems strange to say that, but how can we be less theatrical, I guess, when performing? Because they definitely are performing. I wouldn't say that they're just really neutral and doing their things. They are performing, but we're working on a less theatrical way of performing there, to be quite natural and human, I guess. And when we were practicing it, we had it like a broom, a piano, a shoe, a vase. So all these objects, they were human beings for us in the studio space, and they had to practice talking to them and approaching them, which was kind of fun. And one of my dancers, Hannah, she mentioned afterwards, she's like, I'm really happy that we can finally actually talk to human beings. It felt quite strange to always talk to a piano. But it was helpful.
Like in this really one-sided relationship with a piano.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm getting nothing back. A cold shoulder every time.
But yeah, I think, but we had to practice with someone in rehearsals, and obviously we had sharings, which were super helpful. And I remember myself sometimes being a bit, I don't know if this word is working, if it makes sense, because obviously if you're always just having those objects who are not reacting to anything, and if a work is really dependent on the reactions of audience members and their contribution to it, then it can sometimes feel quite daunting in a rehearsal space. So yeah, we really try to invite people into the space with us after a while, and every time we did that, we were like, okay, it is working, it really does work, but it needs the interaction of human beings in it. Yeah,
I think that's such a crucial point for the choreographer, and it's something I'd say to other choreographers is just, once you have the idea, just get it in front of an audience as soon as you can, even if it's just a couple people or some friends, just because, and don't tell them what the piece is about. Just say, watch it, and then just tell me. A great thing to ask for is just tell us words to describe the piece, or describe what you saw, the thing you're drawing attention to, because sometimes we present work. I remember the first time I showed a piece when I was in art school, and it was a duet that I did in a dance gallery, and I did it for my tutor group, and we didn't talk about what the piece was or was about at all. We just spent the whole conversation afterwards was just, what does dance mean when we put it in a gallery context, and focusing on, so it was me and a Senegalese friend, and so people were talking about the sort of the racial issue, the kind of racial relationship, as well as a duet between a white man and a black man, and that wasn't even part of it. I was just like, oh, I'm gonna get my friend to do this piece with me, and it was that kind of thing where you just need to get in front of an audience, because you have no idea really how people are going to interpret it until you just get the material in front of them and just start to get feedback. So at least you know what you're creating and sort of what you're making.
Yeah, definitely, I think, and especially for work that heavily relies on the participation of audience members. Yeah, it's anyways, every time it will be different. Every time we will perform it, it will be a whole different experience for the dancers and also for audience members. It highly depends on the group of people. Now we performed it mainly for adults, whereas in the future we're hoping to also perform it for children and younger people. And I'm sure it will be entirely different each time, and that also will challenge the dancers, as you said before. They really have to adapt to each individual audience member, I guess, as well. And similar to when you're meeting a new person in real life and you're having a conversation, every time a conversation is completely different. And just to be up for that and also accept that, I guess, is really important.
I think it's great that you're making work that is so accessible for a variety of ages, and keeping that in mind, especially in a time when I think we do tend to siphon things off and say, okay, this is a children's work, and this is, this work is very serious and it's for adults, and it's, very cerebral and philosophical. And it's actually a really lovely thing to experience dance together and experience dance across a wide range of ages, through that kind of line of diversity as well. Especially because it's easy to sort of end up in our own little bubbles of like, oh, I'm hanging out with people in my 20s and 30s and all of these things, like for me, I'm a churchgoer, and so for me, that's one of the few times where I get to see a whole wide spectrum of, from the very elderly to, newborns. And I think when you can create that in a work, it's such a fantastic thing, because you're like, oh, this is kind of like how we're meant to be as human beings, like the young and the old sort of together, just kind of accepting kind of the full breadth of humanity in a way.
And also talking about inclusivity and diversity. So now, after having done the work, I really thought also, how would the work be if I would also include non-dancers into the work? So to not just have audience members who might not be dancers, who might not be dancers, but also to have some of them actually performing the work throughout. So to mix that much more, because I think it's still a little bit of an issue when you're seeing professionally trained dancers on stage doing their thing. I do think there is still a little bit of a hierarchy that can never really be diminished unless you bring people in who are not coming from a dance background and who are doing the same thing together with them. And I think, in the future for any kind of work, I want to focus much more on working also with maybe community dance projects, or involving people from different kind of ages into my work. So active performers, not just making it for a variety of ages, but also actually having them perform in the work. And obviously, very important also having a much more diverse cast in relation to ethnical minorities. So that really, I really questioned what it means to work inclusive, and having a focused, saying that you are working inclusive with everyone from society means that you should also include most people of society in your work, I think, or at least think about that. So that's really something for me to go forward to, I think, in the future.
And that would be such a valuable kind of swap in a way, I think, for a lot of people in the community and the audience to be able to experience it both as a performer and then as an audience member. I think that would be a great way to, especially, for me now, having seen the work, to be able to experience it from the other side as well, I think would be
Come and join us.
Come and join the tribe.
Definitely. That's really, I'm hoping to do something like that in the future. I'm actually applying for PhDs right now.
Oh, wow.
That in mind. So to using the practice that I've been developing now, and to reach out to community, to do as a community project or various community projects over the course of 3 years, and to really work on that. Yeah.
Wow. What does a dance PhD look like?
I don't know yet.
You'll tell us at the end.
Yeah, I'll tell you at the end. I mean, it's 3 years and it's practical as well. So I think it's really depends highly on how your application looks like, and what you want to focus on, and how you want to perform it. And then I think even then, if you have like a really clear idea at the beginning, it can completely change that, what everyone keeps telling me, at least. So I think you have to be really open in the process. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the lovely part about being in a creative industry, is that your research it's actually very similar to kind of scientific research in a way, where you sort of set up your parameters, and then you run an experiment, and then you see what happens, and then you review the experiment and go, did that work or didn't it? And then instead of using kind of empirical and scientific criteria to go, how is this working, we sort of use aesthetic criteria, or whatever our sort of artistic values are. But in that way, it's very much kind of a sort of research process. And I think that's maybe a little bit not always clear, and sometimes a bit opaque to people. And sometimes
that's important, I think, that it doesn't need to be so clear, and that you don't have the outcome already in your mind, because then it's not a good research, is it? If you already know what the outcome might look like and what the outcome might be, then is it really useful to do it? So I think it's quite nice to keep it super open, and and you change as a person over 3 years as well. You change your interests. So if you have I think a good PhD would allow that as well, that you can change your opinions and things that matter to you.
Yeah. And if you're a scientist just trying to go in and confirm, oh, we just want to, get these results, and, that would be sort of bad science, because it would just be riddled with confirmation bias. Yeah. And so often I find some of the most valuable parts of the work are the things that you just discover along the way. And it sort of just requires a bit of an act of faith, in yourself, and faith in the process and in the people that you're working with, to just go, you know what, we don't know what we're doing. And that's something like I would just say to all choreographers, is that the reality is that 80% of the time you're just like, what the heck are we doing? Like, I don't know what's going on. And then because you don't, and you're just trying things, and then only really at the last kind of 20% do you rush the center and go like, let's kind of bring this together and make this kind of coherent and cohesive and articulated. But I think you sort of have to be comfortable in the space of going, I don't know what's going on, and that's okay, and I can just be calm and sort of the eye of the storm, so to speak.
And that's the most exciting part, I think, of making choreography, for me at least, is the moment where you just go into the studio for the first time with the dancers and you have some sort of an idea, or you start working on, or you just improvise, or whatever you're doing in the studio. And these, like what you said, maybe 50% of the time, this is my favorite time in the studio, to just explore and go for things and do really ridiculous things. And there's no limit to anything. Whereas obviously when you start putting things together, then you as a choreographer, you have the responsibility of making something out of it. And it's fun as well. It's nice to shape things and try things out. But I think, the initial phase of just going to the studio and exchanging ideas, and that's really powerful and a good moment.
Sometimes just not knowing why you're doing something. I remember when I don't know which piece it was, probably I think it was Common Ground, and sort of just being a little bit like, why are we doing this, Greta? And you're like, I don't know yet. And then sometimes when you take that little nugget that didn't make sense, or that phrase, and then bring it into the wider context of the piece, then you go, oh, okay, I know how this can relate to kind of this element, and it kind of like come together. And also knowing, okay, well, that's great, but it doesn't really make sense for this. And nothing's really wasted as well as a choreographer or a dancer, because there's phrases that I go, oh, I love this phrase, but it's not right for the piece. So, but it always somehow comes back or finds a way into your work somewhere else. So
absolutely. I find it quite painful though to let go of things. That's one of the things I have to accept much more as well, to be like, not everything can be in it, and then often it's actually better to reduce it to the essence of what you want it to be about, But
yeah, I know that as well. When you like make something that's quite a few different scenes, and then people go, I pretty much resonated with this one scene, and you could have done the whole piece just like extrapolating that out. But again, you just got to put it in front of the audience and just see how people respond, and take your process from there. So it's been so lovely to talk about Memories of Skin and this amazing work. You're moving forward, COVID allowing, there's hopes and plans of future tour of the work. Where can people follow you? Where can they find out about future performances?
I think the best thing, obviously, it's social media. It's very simple as that. So at Greta Gauhe is my own social media account, and then there's at Follow Through Collective, where you can follow more the things that my collective is doing. But also on my website, www.greta.gauhe.com, you can find lots of information about recent works or previous works, and we will also definitely post updates on the tour. We're hoping to start the tour in January 2021, and the tour will consist of a double bill of One Click Away and Memories of Skin. Will be very interactive and participatory, as we've already set, and it will be for two different age groups. For One Click Away will be starting from the age of 3, and Memories of Skin will be starting from the age of 6. And the main thing with this tour is really we're trying to focus on community centers, schools, nurseries, public libraries, and we have lots of venues already confirmed, which we are going to post on our website and social media once it's ready. But that would be really exciting to do it.
And for listeners, we'll pop those information and links in the description below, so you can follow up and check out so you can check out Greta's work and see what she's up to. So thank you, Greta, so much for joining us today on the podcast. It was so amazing to have you on and hear you share some words of wisdom.
It was great. I think it's such a good thing to do, and for people to get to know more about choreographers and the work that they do. It's amazing. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, listeners. And I've been David Evans, and we will see you next week.